There comes a moment in every INFJ's life when their words no longer feel worth giving. Not because they don't care, not because they don't feel, but because they've spent too long explaining themselves to people who never truly listened. They've clarified their intentions, softened their truth, repeated their feelings, and tried to bridge misunderstandings that never should have existed. And when they suddenly go silent, it isn't confusion, it's clarity. It's the realization that their energy is too precious to waste on those who only hear what fits their own story. Their silence is not withdrawal, it's the final answer. INFJs don't stop explaining because they run out of words. They stop because they finally understand that some people don't want to understand. They recognize the patterns, the selective listening, the twisted meanings, the emotional deflection. They see how their vulnerability has been taken for granted, how their honesty has been minimized, how their emotional labor has been misused. And in that realization, something deep inside them shifts. They retreat inward, reclaiming their time, their peace, their dignity. Their silence becomes their boundary, their self-protection, their quiet declaration of self-worth. The moment they stop explaining is the moment they rise above the noise. Before you leave, let me ask you something only the intuitive ones will feel. Have you ever reached the point where silence said everything you were tired of explaining? If you watched until the end, comment, "My silence is my answer," so I know you're one of the INFJ souls who understands this truth. And don't forget to subscribe to Brainy Quiet Mind, where your silence is respected, your depth is understood, and your inner truth finally has a home. They go silent when they realize their explanations no longer change anything. INFJs don't fall silent suddenly. Their silence is the final chapter of a long internal battle. They begin by explaining gently, trying to bridge confusion with patience. They try to clarify their intentions, soften misunderstandings, and offer emotional transparency. But over time, something becomes painfully clear to them. Their explanations aren't changing anything. The other person isn't listening to understand. They're listening to defend, dismiss, or protect their own narrative. And once that realization hits, something deep inside the INFJ collapses into stillness. Their silence becomes the only response left, not because they have nothing to say, but because continuing to speak would be an act of self-betrayal. Silence is not the absence of care, it is the absence of hope that words can fix what someone refuses to hear. Inside the INFJ, this shift feels like a quiet breaking. They replay every moment where they opened their heart only to be misunderstood. They remember the explanations that were brushed aside, the feelings that were minimized, the sincerity that was twisted. They finally see that no matter how carefully they speak, no matter how deeply they feel, no matter how patiently they try to repair the emotional distance, nothing changes. Not because their words lack meaning, but because the listener lacks willingness. And the INFJ, with their razor-sharp intuition, can no longer deny the truth. My words aren't reaching them. That truth drains them more than any conflict ever could. So instead of pushing harder, they step back. And when they go silent, it's not passive, it's powerful. The INFJ is reclaiming energy that was wasted on conversations that circled endlessly without resolution. They are protecting their inner world from people who hear only what they want. They are withdrawing from emotional spaces where their voice was never valued. Their silence becomes a boundary, a decision, a turning point. It is the quiet moment where they choose peace over frustration, dignity over repetition, clarity over chaos. And while others may not notice the importance of this moment, the INFJ knows it marks a permanent shift. Because once they decide silence is better than speaking, they never return to the same dynamic again. That relationship, that conversation, that emotional connection, it changes forever. They won't fight to be heard by someone who never listened. They won't explain themselves to someone who prefers misunderstanding. Their silence is the INFJ's way of saying, "This is where my effort ends." And nothing they say afterward will carry the same weight because silence is their final answer. Calm, complete, and irreversible. Silence becomes their boundary after their words are repeatedly dismissed. INFJs don't choose silence because they lack the courage to speak. They choose it because speaking has proven useless. After offering explanation after explanation, only to have their words dismissed, minimized, or twisted, they begin to understand something crucial. Their voice is landing in a place where it's not valued, and when an INFJ realizes their sincerity is falling on deaf ears, silence becomes their boundary. It becomes the line they draw between themselves and the emotional harm of being unheard. It's the quiet moment where they say, without speaking a single word, "I will not keep giving myself to someone who refuses to receive me." Silence becomes their language of self-respect. Inside the INFJ, this transformation is slow and deeply emotional. They try everything first: careful wording, softened tone, emotional vulnerability, patient clarification. They give chance after chance, hoping the next explanation will finally be understood. But each time their words are brushed aside, something inside them tightens. They feel the ache of being misunderstood by someone who should have cared enough to listen. They notice how exhausting it is to speak into a void. They sense the imbalance. They are putting in all the emotional effort while the other person refuses to meet them halfway. Eventually, their heart reaches a breaking point. Not dramatic, not explosive, just a quiet realization that continuing to speak is only hurting them. And when the INFJ switches from words to silence, everything changes. They no longer respond to accusations. They no longer defend their intentions. They no longer offer emotional context to someone who has repeatedly rejected it. Their silence is not avoidance. It is a firm, calm refusal to keep participating in a dynamic that diminishes them. It is the INFJ choosing peace over frustration, dignity over explanation, inner clarity over external chaos. And ironically, their silence often speaks louder than any explanation ever could. The absence of their voice becomes a mirror, reflecting back the truth the other person refused to see when it was spoken aloud. But here is the most powerful part. Once silence becomes the INFJ's boundary, they rarely go back. The boundary is final. Their emotional door closes, not with anger, but with certainty. They won't reopen it for someone who taught them their words held no weight. They move forward quietly, taking their depth, empathy, and emotional honesty with them, leaving behind only silence where their voice once lived. For the INFJ, silence is not weakness. It is strength. It is healing. It is the final version of a boundary they tried many times to express in words, until words were no longer worth giving. They withdraw emotionally when they feel their vulnerability has been misused. INFJs don't give their vulnerability freely. They give it carefully, intentionally, and only when they believe the connection is safe. Their openness is not random. It is a rare invitation into their inner world. So when that vulnerability is mishandled, dismissed, used against them, or taken for granted, something inside them shifts instantly. They withdraw. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet precision of someone who has learned the cost of emotional exposure. Their emotional warmth cools, their trust folds inward, their presence becomes reserved, and this withdrawal is not punishment, it is self-protection. For an INFJ, emotional misuse is not a misunderstanding, it is a fracture of the deepest kind. Inside the INFJ, this shift happens the moment they realize their vulnerability has been treated carelessly. Maybe someone mocked a fear they shared. Maybe they revealed an insecurity and received judgment instead of understanding. Maybe they trusted someone with their truth only to watch it be minimized or weaponized. These betrayals, even when subtle, feel enormous to the INFJ because they do not open up lightly. They analyze every detail, replay every moment, and their intuition tells them exactly when a line has been crossed. And once the line is crossed, the INFJ instinctively retreats into themselves. They withdraw, not because they want to, but because they must. This emotional withdrawal is often misunderstood. To others, it may look like distance, moodiness, or disinterest, but in reality, the INFJ is tending to a wound that words cannot explain. They are gathering their emotions, rebuilding their inner safety, and recalibrating their boundaries. They stop giving emotional access to someone who has proven unworthy of it. They stop sharing the deepest parts of themselves. Their responses become shorter, their expressions quieter, their heart less reachable. But beneath that calm surface is a soul that has been hurt, a soul choosing silence because speaking would only deepen the wound. And once the INFJ withdraws emotionally, the dynamic changes permanently. They will remain polite, composed, and gentle, but the emotional intimacy that once existed will not return easily, if at all. They cannot unknow the betrayal of trust. They cannot unfeel the sting of having their vulnerability mishandled. Their emotional retreat is their way of saying, "You had access to the most fragile parts of me, and you didn't protect them." And after that point, they become cautious, guarded, and self-contained. For the INFJ, emotional withdrawal is not the beginning of distance. It is the confirmation that distance is necessary. They stop clarifying because they recognize the other person listens to defend, not understand. INFJs can sense the moment a conversation stops being a space for understanding and becomes a battlefield of defensiveness. They notice the subtle shifts, the tightened tone, the interruption, the quick rebuttal, waiting behind every breath. They see how the other person isn't listening to learn or connect, they're listening to protect their ego. And once an INFJ realizes that every attempt to clarify will be twisted into an attack or counter-argument, they stop trying altogether. They won't waste emotional energy explaining their heart to someone who is only preparing their next defense. Silence becomes their shield, not because they have nothing to say, but because speaking to a closed mind is a form of self-destruction. Inside the INFJ, this realization forms slowly but painfully. They enter conversations with honest intentions, hoping to resolve misunderstandings through calm explanation. They try to articulate their feelings with care, hoping the other person will meet them with openness. But instead, they find themselves in a loop. Their words are misheard, their emotions dismissed, their motives questioned. The INFJ feels the emotional exhaustion of talking to someone whose priority is not connection but control. And the moment their intuition confirms that the conversation is no longer about understanding, something inside them shifts. They retreat inward, recognizing that continuing would only damage their peace. This shift is often misunderstood by the other person. They might accuse the INFJ of shutting down, being cold, or refusing to talk. But the INFJ isn't refusing to talk, they're refusing to argue with someone who cannot or will not hear them. They know that true understanding requires vulnerability on both sides, and when only one person is willing to be vulnerable, the conversation becomes a trap. So they step out of it. Their silence is not avoidance, it is wisdom, a decision to protect their heart from being twisted into something it's not. And once the INFJ stops clarifying, the relationship dynamic changes permanently. They no longer offer explanations to soothe someone's defensiveness. They no longer justify their emotions to someone who invalidates them. They no longer soften their truth to make someone else comfortable. Their silence becomes their boundary, a quiet declaration that says, "I will not fight to be understood by someone who refuses to understand." And once that boundary is set, the INFJ rarely returns to the old pattern. For them, clarity is a shared responsibility, and they will not continue giving it alone. Their silence is a sign of emotional exhaustion, not indifference. When INFJs go silent, people often mistake it for coldness or apathy, but the truth is far more delicate. Their silence isn't distance born from lack of care. It's distance born from caring too much for too long. INFJs give emotional energy generously, deeply, and consistently. They try to fix misunderstandings, space-alize conflict, and hold emotional space for others until their own heart grows heavy. And when they reach a point where words no longer flow, it's not because they don't feel, it's because they've felt everything with a depth that becomes overwhelming. Their silence is the body saying, "I'm tired." The heart saying, "I've given enough." The intuition saying, "It's time to protect yourself." Inside the INFJ, emotional exhaustion doesn't look like collapse. It looks like quiet withdrawal. They still think, still feel, still observe, but they no longer have the strength to translate those feelings into language. They no longer have the energy to hold the weight of conversations that take without giving. They no longer have the capacity to carry both their emotions and someone else's simultaneously. Their silence is the moment they retreat inward, to recharge, to find clarity, to breathe without the pressure of being understood or misunderstood. It's a process of repairing the fractures caused by prolonged emotional effort. They need stillness the way others need noise. They need solitude the way others need validation. But to the outside world, this silence can appear cold. People may assume the INFJ has stopped caring, lost interest, or disconnected. But what they fail to see is the tenderness in that silence, the way it holds the remnants of all the emotional investment that drained them. INFJs step back because they've reached a limit, not because the connection meant nothing. They go quiet because continuing to speak would mean pushing themselves past the point of emotional wellness. They choose silence as a way to stop the bleeding, not as a way to punish anyone. And when INFJs finally emerge from that silence, it is because they've regained enough inner strength to engage authentically again. Their return is gentle, thoughtful, intentional, never impulsive. But if someone pushes them during that quiet period, demanding explanations or placing blame, the INFJ withdraws even further. Their silence is not indifference, it is a plea for emotional space, a request for understanding without pressure, a signal that they need time, not criticism. INFJs don't shut down because they don't care. They shut down because they've cared too deeply, too consistently, and for too long without rest. Silence, for them, is healing. Silence is survival. Silence is the only way to protect a heart that feels everything. They retreat inward to protect their peace and rebuild their inner clarity. When an INFJ retreats inward, it is not an escape, it is a return to themselves. They move back into the quiet corners of their mind because that is where their peace lives, where their intuition speaks without interruption, and where they can reorganize the emotional chaos the world has pushed onto them. Their inner world is their sanctuary, their compass, their place of truth. Though when life becomes overwhelming, when relationships grow tangled, when misunderstandings pile up, or when their emotional energy is stretched thin, they withdraw, not to avoid the world, but to cleanse themselves of it. This retreat is an act of healing. It is the INFJ choosing stillness over noise, reflection over reaction, clarity over confusion. Inside the INFJ, the need to retreat comes after too many moments of emotional overstimulation or misalignment. They feel everything intensely: conflict, tension, disappointment, unspoken emotions. And these experiences accumulate, like weight on their chest. Their intuition starts buzzing louder. Their thoughts spiral deeper. Their empathy absorbs more than it should. And when they reach that threshold, they know they must step inward before they lose themselves trying to stay outward. Their retreat is intentional. They unplug, they quiet their surroundings, they distance themselves from emotional demands. They let silence wash over them until their mind stops spinning and their heart starts breathing again. To others, this inward retreat may look like distance, withdrawal, or disinterest. But for the INFJ, it is the only way to return to emotional alignment. They rebuild themselves in solitude, analyzing what hurt them, understanding what drained them, identifying what needs to change. They reflect deeply, sorting through their feelings the way others sort through tasks. They seek meaning, truth, and direction. Only when their inner clarity starts to return do they feel strong enough to re-engage with the world. Their solitude is their restoration, not their rejection. And when they come back stronger, quieter, perhaps, but more grounded. Their retreat allowed them to reconnect with their intuition, refine their boundaries, and regain emotional balance. They know who they are again, they know what they need, and they know what they will no longer tolerate. This inward journey is part of what makes INFJs resilient. They don't collapse under emotional pressure. They retreat, rebuild, and rise. Their peace is sacred, and their clarity is their power. And anyone who truly knows an INFJ understands this simple truth. When they go inward, they are not disappearing, they are restoring the strength that life tried to take from them. Their silence marks the moment they choose themselves over the draining cycle of explaining. INFJs don't go silent because they have nothing left to say. They go silent because they finally decide their peace matters more than the endless effort of trying to be understood by someone unwilling to understand them. Their silence is not weakness, avoidance, or emotional shutdown. It's a choice, a deliberate shift of energy away from the exhausting cycle of clarifying, defending, repeating, softening, and justifying their feelings. When they stop speaking, it isn't because the conversation ended, it's because they ended abandoned the part of themselves that kept believing explanation could fix everything. Their silence is the moment they reclaim their time, their heart, their dignity. It is the quiet line between the version of them that tried too hard and the version of them that finally chooses themselves. Inside the INFJ, this decision doesn't happen overnight. It comes after countless moments of talking in circles, giving emotional clarity that wasn't appreciated, offering insight that wasn't considered, revealing feelings that were minimized. It builds slowly, like emotional fatigue settling into their bones. They start noticing how drained they feel after every attempt to explain their intentions, how misunderstood they remain despite choosing their words with care, how heavy their chest becomes each time their truth is dismissed, and at some point, something inside them says, no more. It isn't a loud declaration. It's a quiet inner certainty. A switch flips, a door closes, a threshold is crossed. That's when silence becomes their answer. And to the outside world, this silence can be confusing, even alarming. People may think the INFJ has lost interest, become distant, or shut down emotionally. But the reality is far deeper. The INFJ has simply stopped giving energy to a dynamic that drains them. They have stopped participating in a cycle where they are unheard. They have stopped explaining themselves to someone who never intended to understand. Their silence is not the absence of emotion. It is the presence of self-respect. It is the moment they put themselves first after putting others first for far too long. Once the INFJ enters this silence, everything changes. They stop engaging in conversations that exhaust them. They stop offering explanations that fall on closed minds. They stop fighting for clarity in places where clarity will never exist. And this isn't temporary, it's transformative. Their silence becomes the protective wall they should have built years ago. It becomes the boundary that finally holds. It becomes the proof that they are done trying to convince anyone of their worth. When an INFJ chooses silence, they choose themselves. And once they choose themselves, they don't go back. Silence becomes their closure, their healing, and their freedom. In the end, INFJs don't go silent because they're cold, detached, or indifferent. They go silent because they've finally reached the moment where protecting their inner peace matters more than trying to be understood. Silence becomes their clarity. Silence becomes their boundary. Silence becomes the gentle but unshakable decision to stop pouring energy into places that never poured anything back. And in that stillness, they rediscover themselves, their strength, their intuition, their worth. When they stop explaining, they don't lose their voice, they reclaim it. Before you leave, let me ask you something only the intuitive ones will feel deeply. Have you ever chosen silence, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself? If you watched until the end, comment, "My silence protects me," so I know you're one of the INFJ souls who understands this truth. And don't forget to subscribe to Brainy Quiet Mind, where your silence is honored, your depth is seen, and your inner world finally feels understood.